Okay, hi, good afternoon. I'd just like to introduce us. Mike and I both work at the Open University in the Faculty of Education and Language Studies. Our background is in English language teaching, and Mike has worked at the British Council in their Global Products unit for quite a few years, and I made a sideways step from English language teaching into learning technologies and widening participation. So this afternoon we're going to talk about Bangladesh, English in Action and mobile technology. English in Action is a project that we're working on in conjunction with the British Council and Mott MacDonald, and it's a DFID funded project which will last over the next 9 years, and is looking at improving the English language teacher training in Bangladesh. So our speech today, our presentation today, is on transformation in the global context. So transformation in developing countries. The transformation we're looking at is that of communication, and the communication that we want to change and transform is in English, and we're using technology as a means to that end. So the Millennium Development Goal is universal primary education by 2015 for everyone. And in order to get there needs to be a huge change in teacher training. At the moment, UNESCO reckon that about 77 million children are not in school. And of those children that are in primary school, only 1 in 3 complete it. Most of those children live in a rural environment in the developing world, and in order to, if we bring all those children into education, into primary education, it's estimated that the world needs another 18 million teachers. As most of those teachers are going to have to be in rural areas, there's a problem in training them. So there's a lot of projects have in the past looked at using educational technology in the developing world, and many of those projects have ended up dusty in locked cupboards, never used. And the reason is that they're not contextualized to the situation in the developing world. There's been a lot recently written about the amazing adoption of mobile technologies in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. It looks like that adoption is now being transferred across to South Asia. For example, in 2001, there were 200,000 mobile phones in Bangladesh, or people using mobile phones. In July of this year, there were 50 million. So what we're looking at is joining this adoption, this use of mobile technology, and putting it together with teacher training.
Okay, Clare, that's a nice lead-in to Bangladesh itself. Clare was talking about the partnership with the Open University. The BBC is one of the main partners on this as well, and Mott MacDonald. When I first came into this project, Bangladesh, I had a lot of false conceptions probably about what Bangladesh was, and the significance of the country in terms of its neighbours, its potential in the region. It came into being as an independent state in 1971, and it did so largely through language, when after a bloody war with Pakistan, language is incredibly important to every Bangladeshi. One of the things that fascinated me was that the area of Bangladesh is roughly the same size as England and Wales put together. I always note that Wales always comes into these comparisons for some reason. And yet it has a population of somewhere between 140 and 190 million. Truly stunning figure. It's also on the delta of 3 rivers, and most of Bangladesh is less than 12 meters above sea level. A rise in sea level of about a meter would result in 50% of the land being underwater. Obviously, that is a particular concern at the moment. So very high population density, roughly 98% of the population speak Bangla as a first language. So that's very different to its neighbour India, where English has been used as a lingua franca, if you like, for many years. Bangladesh has only fairly recently started to adopt English. And the reason for adopting English, and the reason for this project, and the reason that the Bangladesh government is now putting so many resources into English, is for connection with the outside world, if you like. A bit more on that later. Okay. These figures really speak for themselves, I think. So, interesting there that many school-aged children are in work. I was thinking during our wonderful predecessor's presentation how great it would also be to have contact as this project increases with Bangladeshi primary children who we are now working very, very closely with. They don't have the kind of opportunities at the moment for that sort of outside contact, particularly being a largely rural population. But mobile devices are beginning to open the world to them in a way that wouldn't have been expected some time ago. So why English? Engagement with the global community is one of the chief motivations of the government, and economic development is obviously primarily there as well. They've looked across at their neighbours in India, who for a long time have adapted English as I say, as the lingua franca, but also of the language of development. Business process outsourcing, which I suppose we're all familiar with for some time now, which India was the leader in. India itself is now outsourcing, and their neighbour Bangladesh is an obvious beneficiary or possible market for that. So this has led to a big policy change with the Bangladeshi government. The project we're now working on is actually a 9-year government-funded, DFID-funded project. For those of you that work in development, I think you will know that a 9-year DFID project is extraordinarily rare. So it shows the degree of cooperation that both governments want to put into this. You know, again, I guess probably the Bangladeshi diaspora in the UK are probably quite a big influence in this, as the government wants to create those closer ties. Both governments want to create those closer ties. I think we also have to say, as an English language professional myself, I'm always very aware that English is often seen, there is of course a colonial heritage here, and the spread of English is often raises some eyebrows. It doesn't raise many eyebrows, however, in many developing countries, where they see English as not belonging to us. By us, I mean possible native English speakers. They increasingly see it as belonging to the world. And this has also resulted in a big change in pedagogy in terms of teaching. I think you can see the kind of way that the very creation of English materials is in itself globalized now. When I first came into teaching, we really taught something called EFL, which many of you may have heard of, English as a Foreign Language. This has lots of kind of concepts behind it, but largely, I guess, it sees the native speaker, in inverted commas, as being the gold standard to aspire to. To speak like a native speaker is the norm. It creates a sort of division between native and non-native, between foreigner, the other, the insider, the outsider. And of course, it was assumed that a knowledge of native-speaking communities was a large motivation for learning English. It certainly is not anymore, if that was ever the case. And so we have to recognize this as we develop materials. And by we, I mean increasingly now the materials, of course, are being developed on a local basis. Again, learning technologies are helping that to happen, and Claire's going to say a bit more about that in a moment. Oh, sorry, just take that back. Now we see English much more as a global language, and recognizing that English is a global language. Most interactions in English are not between native speaker English people. The vast majority now are between two non-native speakers. And also, there is much more focus on intelligibility rather than on features of the language. There's more focus on cross-cultural skills. And also global or local themes are taken as content. So that for content producers, it's very important to know what those local themes are, what is truly relevant in the local market. Lots of development projects, particularly in education, have often not really taken this into account. So it leads to a different curriculum, a different pedagogy, different materials, and also a different way of distributing materials.
So traditionally in Bangladesh, the kind of teaching that's taken place has been very, very traditional. Very teacher-centred, a lot of rote learning. But with globalisation and the changes, I think the government of Bangladesh see that they need to change that in order to make their country more of a player in the global world. And so they're moving towards a more student-centred kind of learning. Now, one of the problems is that there have been a lot of English language projects in Bangladesh over the last few years. And most of them have had very poor results. And the reason they've had poor results are partly because the teachers have been taken individually from their school to a location away from the school where they've had a very intensive maybe 2 weeks of English language teaching. They then go back to the school. They have no contact with anyone. There's very little support, no ongoing support. So that whatever they've learned in their few weeks away, they forget, they don't apply it to the classroom. What English in Action is aiming to do is to actually take the training to the classroom. So to use school-based training. And the way we do that is to give the teachers a very short initial workshop explaining the pedagogy, showing them the materials which we put on the iPod. At the moment we're using an iPod Touch. They can then take these, but in pairs, so they come from their schools in pairs. They go back to their school and the training goes with them in their pockets, basically. They can then work through the training modules. They're able to communicate with their partner in the school to try things out, to see what works, what doesn't work, to reflect upon what they're doing. And once a month they come together with 10 schools from their district, so 20 teachers, and an English in Action facilitator who gives them more support, runs through the next piece of training that they're doing, looks at how they've applied it in the classroom, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So we're currently at in a pilot stage, and we're working with 400 teachers across the whole of Bangladesh, so in all 6 divisions. Those 400 teachers are in 200 schools, so they're in pairs, and every one of them will get an iPod Touch. On the iPod Touch are 12 modules of teaching, looking at English language teaching through a communicative language teaching approach. Of those 400, in March, so we're kicking off in January, although we are actually working at the moment on a pre-pilot with 30 teachers. So we start in January. In March, April, 50 of the teachers will also get a smartphone. And in March, another 50 will get a set of laptops and digital cameras. So this is the first phase, the communicate phase. On the iPod are loaded 12 modules, audio and video, and they also have a book which supports them, guides them through the modules, helps them to reflect upon what they're seeing and what they're listening to. Okay, I've got a few examples here of the materials. The audio materials are in English, but also in Bangla. because it's teacher training, not an English language development course. And it may well be that many of the teachers will listen to the Bangla alongside the English. So I'll start by playing some of the audio.
Hello and welcome to Module 3, Listening and Responding. In this module, we will talk about using listening activities that involve a physical response from students. We will also consider ways of giving clear classroom instructions in English.
When the teachers hear this, they actually get on their iPod screen text and images that come with it. It's a kind of enhanced audio. Unfortunately, we've developed it on a Mac and it won't work on the PC. You see that we're not using what you would call native speaker English. We're using Bangladeshi English. Bangladeshi English speakers, and part of the audio has conversations in Bangladeshi between teachers to make it realistic and to the situations that the teachers themselves are facing. There are also audios on classroom language to help the teachers to develop their own language and use appropriate English in the classroom.
Giving instructions.
Stand up. Everyone stand up, please. Rashid, please stand up. Sit down. Everyone sit down, please.
Okay, so each unit develops that
Yasmin,
along.
please sit down.
Can we have the video now?
So, we are going to listen to a story. Okay. And you have to understand that there are I have two questions from this story, okay? So, one question is, what is this story all about? You have to understand that. And you have to find out who are the characters in that story, okay? So, I play the story for you, and you have to listen it very carefully.
On the video, on the iPod player are materials for the teachers to use in the classroom. And these videos are showing them how they can use them. They're not model lessons, they're actual Bangladeshi teachers using the material in their lessons to give the other teachers an idea of how they can apply them. Okay?
Very tired.
So that's the first phase. The second phase, and I should stress here that this is very much a pilot, so we're trying different technologies to see which is the most effective. You can see that the number of mobile internet users in Bangladesh is growing and is quite high. A lot of people have mobiles, but the mobile internet coverage is very uncertain. I think the Bangladeshi government say that by the end of this year it will be across 80% of the country, but reality seems to prove differently, so we need to test that out. But the idea of giving them a connecting part of the project is to pull teachers together so that they can create a kind of community of practice. At the moment, they're very isolated, particularly the rural teachers within their school. So by using social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter to get them together, particularly Twitter with its kind of controlled use number of letters is quite good for this kind of work. And also, it means that we give them access to online materials. So there's a lot of material out there which they have no way of using to help them in their classroom. And the final stage of it is the create stage. And this is particularly targeting people in the most disadvantaged areas where the waterways take the place of roads. So it's very difficult to get access to them. And these teachers are particularly isolated. So we're kitting out 2 boats with a school to help the teachers have training and to take laptops, mobile phones. And one of the aims of the laptops and digital cameras, etc., is to give the learners a purpose for using English, to help them to create an identity online, which they can then share with others across the globe. So, for example, the children that we just saw at Northumbrie Primary would be an ideal match to kind of work with these children, to sort of give them a purpose for using English with technology. 52% of Bangladeshi adults are illiterate, in Bangla. So there's a huge literacy problem. And as the digital divide grows, and they need multi-literacies now as well, not just a sort of simple literacy, if you like, with reading, but also the ability to manipulate visual and to read visual and audio.
Okay, so we want to leave room for any questions you might have at the end. So just moving forward a little bit, the model for this then is very much, as I hope we both conveyed, the teachers at the centre. And we very much envisaged the project that way right from the start. The teachers and their culture, the real culture that they come from. And around that we have the peer support, which is with the other teacher in the school. We stress again, always working in pairs with this. The technical support, as well as having the technical support currently at a national level based in Dhaka, in the capital. We are now working on a regional model where there will be technical support available in each of the various Bangladeshi districts. There will be the face-to-face element we maintain is still very important, but it's really as a way of exchanging the learning experiences that will have taken place with their peers and alone with their iPods, and most importantly, with their students in the classroom. So there'll be 3 face-to-face workshops throughout the academic year, the running of the project. The materials we've already outlined to you, but obviously we would see a materials bank developing over the lifespan of the project that is probably going to go in directions that we can't even anticipate at the moment. And we also don't really know the delivery system. At the moment, we're talking of iPod touches. It may well be that we will be using something quite different in a few years down the line. We're bound to be. And also we are developing a group of 40 facilitators who, if you like, are doing some of the teacher training, but it's more than teacher training. It's also, there's quite a paradigm shift from the idea of student-centered learning, of teacher-centered learning to student-centered learning, which is a huge shift to go through and involves a large degree of self-reflective learning. So the facilitators would also be working with the teachers on that. We're aware of the huge challenges that such a project is going to throw up, is already throwing up, and obviously we're going to have to be very nimble and flexible about how we handle this. The curriculum itself, it's interesting looking at mobile learning generally, its applications in the UK too. I think there's no difference whether we're in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, or whether in Nottingham, in terms of one thing, the curriculum. The government sees the curriculum at the centre, and anything we create has to be around the curriculum. Teachers, students, parents are all going to care very much about that. There's the reality of teachers' time. Teachers in so many developing countries have had projects thrown at them. And the reality of their lives, for many, often women, supporting a number of children and usually doing 2 or 3 jobs in order to support their families, simply is something that, if we don't take that into account, it's going to fail. Again, I think mobile devices do give an opportunity to create a practical learning environment for people. Also, the stakeholders' attitudes, very important. It's never difficult in these projects to get buy-in from stakeholders, but actually they need to have a real understanding of what the project is about, and the potential of handheld devices in education, which is a battle that isn't necessarily won at the beginning. There are, of course, just the practical infrastructure problems of things like electricity. I think it's fairly obvious why we are using iPod touches in a place that has an intermittent electricity supply. But it is there most days, even in rural places, you are able to charge your iPods. However, you know, we've got to keep considering this area. Claire mentioned mobile coverage. Part of the project clearly won't work unless we actually have a proper mobile internet coverage. And obvious, I know, but climate just can't be overstated in many countries in the developing world, but probably none more so than Bangladesh, for reasons I stated at the beginning, but also the technologies that we use. We don't yet know how they're going to fare in very humid countries such as Bangladesh, and certainly that has to be a constant consideration. One of the things, again, finally, I hope that we made clear during the presentation is that for us the real driving force is the pedagogy. The technology is very much a means to an end, even though I don't think we're going to achieve the end without the technology. So I think we'll leave it there, and if there are any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Claire, I think a great example of real transformation as a consequence of the use of mobile technologies to make a real impact and benefit on the lives of people, and in fact, many people in this particular instance. We've got time for a couple of questions, so I'd like to throw that open to the floor. Fire away. Do we have a question from the floor? Excuse me, I'm trying these glasses in for my dog. Okay, I have a question. Maybe that'll stimulate some. Everyone's very quiet. Is it because it's after lunch or something like that, or are you just waiting for the prize draw? The affordability, cost of access. I've also done quite a, well, not as much as work as you have, but work in some developing nations, particularly in the Caribbean and in West Africa. And what I've noticed there is that the telcos are the telcos that we kicked out of the UK because they were not doing a very good job. And they now have monopoly situations in some countries where they charge a huge amount of money to gain access. I know there's one particular company with the initial C and W operating in the Caribbean that were charging outrageous amounts of money for internet access. And when I was trying to do projects there with local schools, really there was an absolute problem in doing that, so it became completely non-affordable. Have there been any experiences like that in your programs in Bangladesh?
I think one thing in Bangladesh is the Grameen company own a very large part of the telecom industry. And Grameen is, the guy who owns Grameen has set up the microcredit company. So there's a history in Bangladesh of mobile phones being very affordable. So for example, he uses them in the way that a woman in a very remote rural village can rent a mobile phone on very reasonable rates and use that phone for the village, and the village pays her to do various things that they want done. So there is a history, I think, in the country of telecom not being extortionately expensive, but looking at it as a means of development.
So it's really interesting that there's a sort of a community state type response to the fact of knowing that there needs to be access to...
And that sets the bar, obviously, exactly where we want it. In other words, in terms of competition, Grameen is going to be quite a competitor to tackle.
There needs to be a few of those in a sense, though. I mean, I know that in certain parts of West Africa and certainly in the Caribbean, it's a real problem there to sort of break those, because they see that the whole broadband thing is for the elite as opposed for the masses, which I think is a great shame. Makes things very difficult to get access to.
I think there is a real danger of that, but certainly, as Claire says, there is already an expectation, and not just amongst elites, I think, that broadband is going to reach everywhere. And the ubiquity of mobile phone use is something that strikes you as soon as you get off the plane in the airport. I remember the first time I arrived in Dakar, wanting the experience of one of the rickshaw drivers, and the rickshaw driver was indeed on his mobile phone, and that's a very common sight, in fact.
Of course. That stimulated the question at all? Yes, gentleman in the back, blue shirt. If you could just state your name and where you're from, and then your question.
Good afternoon. My name is John Brown from Leeds. I'm interested in the design of your application, as to whether you had selected the device, the target device, to deliver the pedagogy, and then designed the pedagogy around the delivery available, the technology available with that device, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, it was the other way around. We had a clear idea of what we wanted to do with the pedagogy, and we looked at various devices. The advantage of the iPod Touch is obviously the size of the screen, but also the ease of usability for the teachers. The slight problem with the iPhone, when we go down the smartphone, is that the iPhone is not yet in Bangladesh, although we are assured by Apple that it will be in January. But it may well be that we can't do the Connect side of the project with the iPhone. We'll use whatever is available that enables us to do what we want to do.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you again, Mike and Claire from Open University. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Excellent project. Excellent project.